Welcome to River of Ideas, the podcast about greener cities and cleaner water. I'm your host, Nick Busse, the Communications and Operations Manager at the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, and I'm here today talking with Connie Fortin. Connie is a low-salt strategist at Bolton Menk and a recognized smart salting expert, and she has dedicated her career to finding ways to reduce the impact of chloride pollution in our waterways. Connie, welcome.
Well, thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you, and we're here today to talk about low-salt design. I also want to get into a little bit about your personal background and kind of how you came into your career field, but I thought we would just start with a little teaser. What is low-salt design?
Well, low-salt design is really a way to design our infrastructure so it performs better in winter. If it performs better in winter, it's safer, and we don't need so much salt. So that's what low-salt design is.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about salt. It is obviously one of the major pollutants of concern in our waterways because of the chloride that's in it. And when we talk about salt, we're actually talking about not just salt, but various de-icing chemicals that have chloride in them. I pulled some stats from the MPCA's website. 445,000 tons. That is how much salt we put on our roads, in parking lots and surfaces annually in the state of Minnesota. And 1 teaspoon of salt is enough to permanently pollute 5 gallons of fresh water. And that road salt just accumulates over time, year after year. Once it's in the water, it doesn't really go away. It doesn't break down. 78% of the road salt that ends up 78% of the salt that gets applied on our roads ends up either in groundwater or surface waters. And there are currently, I hope this number is current, 67 water bodies that are listed as impaired for chloride in the state of Minnesota. Can you talk about, obviously you've dedicated, your life to this issue. Can you talk about this issue and why we should be concerned about chloride?
Right. Well, I could take the whole podcast to talk about this, but I'll try to make it brief. So chloride or salt is a sneaky pollutant. We aren't afraid of it because we put it on our popcorn. It's a household ingredient and it doesn't have the skull and crossbones. But when we import so much into our communities for water softeners, for de-icers, for fertilizers, it all ends up in our water and it all stays there. It isn't a pollutant that immediately poisons something, but when the concentrations grows, it's a toxic to aquatic life, and it doesn't make the lakes purple or foamy or give out any warning. It's just like invisible. And therefore, we're really slow to recognize it as a threat, and we're pretty slow to do something about it. So it's time to gear up.
Absolutely. It's an interesting pollutant because there was a time when we didn't put all this salt on our roads. And so it's really only been, I think, since the 1940s. And people today, I think, just have an expectation that this is what you do whenever it snows and that we should be putting salt on the roads. And in fact, a lot of people will get angry and, go on their city's Facebook page and say, why aren't you putting more salt on the road? So I think there's a public perception issue there as well.
Well, I'd like to just kind of jump in on that. I've trained snowplow drivers for decades, thousands of them, trying to get them to integrate science and technology into their work. And that industry is shifting. I'm encouraged. But they don't necessarily put salt down for fun or because they're bored. They are trying to counteract a safety issue. So there's ice somewhere. And I'm really lucky late in my career to get to work now with our civil engineers, landscape architects, and our planners to say, how might we design that built world so the ice isn't there? Mm-hmm. If the ice isn't there, the maintenance people will be drinking coffee in the shop. They're not going to be out putting salt on the sidewalk.
Right.
So we're kind of working with both industries.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you arrived at this choice of career, because I took a peek at your LinkedIn page and I didn't realize your degrees are actually in computer science.
Oh, yes.
So how did you end up becoming the kind of go-to smart salting expert and then now the low salt expert?
Well, right out of college, I had a biology and a computer science degree, and my master's in computer science, and that all had to do with me being able to get a job. So anyhow, I ended up working mostly developing software for military reconnaissance systems. Spent about 15, 17 years, loved it. It paid well. I got to work with really smart electrical engineers and software engineers. But I ultimately didn't believe in the mission of my work.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a crossroads, and I thought, okay, I'm going to see what I can do, to save the world. I had no idea how I would do that and how I could jump in. I did an internship at the Hennepin Conservation District, unpaid internship, when I was 30-some years old, to see if what I knew about project management could apply into a field I more believed in. And guess what? All I had to learn was their words and their terms and their lingo. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could run projects in this area. And then I had to figure out, well, what project? And Carolyn and Dindorf and I had been talking about all the big salt trucks, and that has to end up in our water, and why isn't anybody talking about it? So we did a little bit of monitoring. We saw crazy concentrations, and just took the ball and ran with it. Said, okay, let's talk about it. Let's understand it. Let's make people aware. Let's do something about it. And so, 25, 30 years later, it's a topic we now talk about.
So at that point, when you kind of started down this road, were people doing anything about this problem?
I found one person at the MPCA who had, Keith Cherryholmes was his name. He studied the toxicity of, the water next to a salt pile, in particular if it was a river or lake. And he understood what that did to the water. But that was it. In that his concern was more in storage, which is a problem. But no, we just said, we asked the MPCA for funds to develop some sort of guidance or communication with the industry on this. And they had a P2 grant, which was, I can't remember, some kind of innovation, pollution prevention grant, which they awarded to us. We worked with the private side of winter maintenance, particularly developed some guidance for them, and they liked it. They understood it, and we kept working with them in their grants program, for many, many years to develop training and tools and guidance for the winter maintenance industry. It was a great partnership.
Was there any research or programs elsewhere in the nation or the world to draw from, or how did you go about developing that curriculum? I mean, so the concept is use the absolute minimum amount of salt to keep the roads safe. So you're not compromising safety,
right?
But you're just minimizing the amount of excess pollution. Where do you start to develop a program?
Well, we looked any place we could. Kathy Schaefer was a trainer for MnDOT and for our local LTAP, and she had some best management practices she had designed or was teaching MnDOT. So we worked with her to learn those. We went to any kind of trade shows on winter maintenance to try to learn what were the strategies. And then we applied our own thinking, about the chemicals and the spread pattern and the pavement temperatures. Our biggest barrier really wasn't figuring out things to do. It was giving the plow drivers confidence that if they changed how they have done things, which used to be a more salt is better thinking, because they're trained to make things safe. To say, yes, we can have it equally safe, but we can also protect the water, the infrastructure, the plants and animals. And so to get them to trust a different philosophy has been a challenge that we're making progress at, but it's still, they're nervous. They don't want anybody hurt on their road.
Well, that was going to be my next question was, how did the practitioners respond when you approached them? What was your pitch? And who did you go to first? Was it the public works folks or was it the private sector?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think we started out talking about parking lots and sidewalks, and we invited anybody that managed them to the table. I remember classes where nobody came to, because they weren't used to being trained on these type of things. That quickly changed, but I do remember in the early years, first off, as a young woman in front of generally a male audience, hearing a lot of, do you want dead fish or dead people? And a lot of, have you ever driven a snowplow and what do you know? So it took some work to be able to relate to them. And I learned to change my sales pitch to not be telling them what to do, but to offering options. Like, here's our problem. Here are the options we have. What makes sense for you? And what do you see? And I heard a lot of stories over the years of what they didn't like about how that intersection was designed, how that parking lot was designed, how that sidewalk or steps were designed, what made it difficult for them. So they were teaching me the whole time I was teaching them, which it was necessary.
Yeah. Well, and so now practitioners, whether you're talking about public works or private sector, they can get certified by MnDOT.
Right.
Smart salting. And I believe there's also certifications for property managers and more like groundskeeper type roles. So you were the person who developed those programs essentially, right? I mean,
yes.
You and your staff.
Right.
When did you start your company?
1996.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were under contract with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to develop training, to develop manuals, to deliver the training, to just move, that whole thing ahead. And of course, we always had a program manager at the MPCA that would keep us in line and we would keep them informed. And it was a good collaborative system. And then we had wonderful partners like MWMO that hosted many, many training classes. And, we got into a good rhythm and really moved Minnesota to the top in the nation, maybe the top in the world, bringing this kind of education, vision, and tools to that industry.
And have we seen that program kind of expanded or duplicated in other states? Are there people, I assume there's people doing this work in Maine and Wisconsin and other cold weather states?
Yes, actually. So New Hampshire has a similar program. They call theirs the Green Pro, I think, something like that. We developed training for Illinois. I think there's a Smart About Salt. I could have the names confused. We developed training for Wisconsin. They call their SaltWise. We've developed training for Michigan, their DOT, and we've contributed, I think, to that awareness, to the pool of resources, and it consulted and collaborated with many people across the world on this topic.
Well, let's skip ahead a little bit and let's talk about what you're doing now at Bolton Menk. So this smart salting training obviously is still going on. I believe the MPCA is sort of running it at this point.
Yep. We're under contract with them to teach the classes for them.
Okay.
And we collaborate with them, all the time. But yes, we're still doing that.
Okay. So now let's talk about low salt design.
Fabulous.
Where do we start? Yeah.
Jump in?
Yep.
Okay. So I decided I was getting old and I owned a company and not what I'm going to do with the company. So I sold my company, which is kind of a scary thing to do. But anyhow, I sold my company to Bolton Menk. They're a civil engineering firm, and they design all the things we salt, all the sidewalks, bridges, parking lots, roads, you name it. And it's a perfect storm because what I was hoping is we could bring our staff and our projects and, programs to integrate with them. But I was hoping I'd get the opportunity to design some new training and tools for the design team. so we could design for better winter performance. Now, a little bit of a funny story. I ran a 5-person company for years. Now I'm in a 1,000-person company, so it feels a little different. I don't have to clean the bathrooms anymore, things like that. But about a month into it, I sent an email to the president of the company saying, hey, if we do low-salt design, we can make our pavement safer, takes the pressure off winter maintenance, drives down the need for salt, and when we drive down the need for salt, we protect our water, we protect our infrastructure, we protect soils, plants, animals. We're in compliance with all sorts of things like the MS4 permit, the MPCA Chloride Management Plan, and we protect our beautiful communities. So I hit the send button, and then I realized, well, whoa, maybe I should have went through the chain of command. I'm not used to that. But fortunately, the president of the company emailed me back that same day, said, let's hear what you're talking about. And the company supported. They said, let's see what we can do. So they assigned me a couple engineers, because I don't know anything about engineering, a transportation engineer, a stormwater engineer, and I just kind of listened to them. I looked over their shoulders. I tried to see what an engineer thinks about. And it was really interesting to me. So my stormwater engineer told me, we design for rain. We don't design for snow. I'm like, what? You're kidding me, right? No, there's nothing in any of the rules, the guidance, the requirements to design for snow. Our snow melts at a rate that is covered with our rain design. And I'm like, well, that explains a lot of the problems.
Yeah, that's interesting. In a state where there's snow on the ground half the year, that they're not factoring that into the designs. No, there's no requirements. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I think we can do different. But my second engineer that I was getting lessons from is a transportation engineer. And he constantly talked about ponding water. He hates ponding water. He designed so there's no ponding water. And, like after a day and a half, I was losing my mind. I'm like, Justin, I don't care about ponding water. I care about sprawling water. Sprawling water makes a sheet of ice. That makes a huge salting event. And so we just looked at each other like, I have a different worry than he does. He's following the requirements. But I see that we maybe need a requirement or we need a different way of thinking because these sheets of ice have to go away. So anyhow, I got my little bit of engineering training. Worked with Tim Olson, and we came up with 10 areas of thought for low-salt design that are very simple, that would help our engineers remember winter. It's a voluntary thing. They're not required to worry about winter, but Bolton and Menk now is integrating winter into all of our designs. We feel it's our obligation, since we now know about it, to use it. And I'm hoping we'll change civil engineering standards for cold climates. And maybe what we can do is just to kind of give people an image of what we're talking about. I think we all have places that we know of, either at home, in our yards, on our walkways, driveways, whatever, or businesses that we go to frequently, where in the winter, there's always just a spot where the ice just accumulates and where you always have to be careful. Either there's a low spot where the water just sort of pools, or it's underneath, a awning or some kind of a roof, eave, that there's just always, icicles coming down. And so it's those hazardous spots. And so it's how can we design infrastructure to avoid those kind of spots? That's sort of what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. All right. So let's get into it. So, should I pull up some examples that you sent?
Well, let me just give you just a verbal description of a few things I think our audience will understand. One of our guiding principles is use the sun. If something's in the shadows in the winter, it's slower pavement recovery. So if we can put those really important areas like the front steps in the sun, we have increased the winter safety, reduced the need for salt, and so on. So You might not be able to rotate your building, let's say. But what if you have a pine tree that shades the front entrance? What if you switch that out for an oak tree? The oak tree loses its leaves in the winter. We still get the summer shade, but now we get the winter sun. Yeah. We get a better performance. And so some of these things are very, very simple.
Yeah.
So,
it's such a simple and compelling idea. It's one of those things where you just go like, why hasn't anybody thought of this before?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like, at least it would be a factor that, designers could consider. And so yeah, I mean, I think that is a perfect example. That makes perfect sense to me, the way you described that.
Yeah.
Well, how should we proceed?
Well, so I'll just tell you a few of the basic ideas, and then we can get into a few more details. So use the sun. It's free. It's easy. It doesn't cost you any more in design. Outsmart the wind is another thing. Our designers design in an office building and climate controlled. They don't feel the sun and the wind. So now in our CAD system, we drew the sun in the south, shining on their designs, and we have a lookup table for the prevailing winter wind direction. All of the designs have the wind now drawn into them, so they can say, oh, my goodness, what is this going to do to that intersection, to that front step, to the parking lot? Because now we see it. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bunch of other things, but meltwater sprawl, that sheet of ice, we got to design it away. I tell our designers the plow drivers are responsible for the snow that falls from the sky. Okay? They got to clear the road, the parking lot. That's their job. Your job as designers is to not let it come back on. No, you keep it away from our saltable surfaces once it's removed. And that is a completely new way of thinking about things. And is perfectly within their control. They just have to understand that's their job. Mm-hmm. So it's not required to be their job, not yet. But ethically, morally, to make the best design, it is their job.
So does it feel like you're kind of like when you started down the road of teaching smart salting, there's a whole new group of professionals that you have to convince to incorporate these. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And if the watershed or the city, is reviewing a development project, you too could say, we got shade on the front steps. The northwest wind is going to fill this with snow. Mm-hmm. Our snow piles are going to drain right across the intersection. Yeah. This is not good. We could also have a voice in that.
Right. What are some of the other, I think you mentioned there were sort of 10 principles. Mm-hmm. What are a couple of the other ones?
Okay, so use the sun, outsmart the wind. Then we go horizontal drainage and vertical drainage. Vertical drainage is the snow that rests on things that are taller, like your roof. Mm-hmm. That snow, that 50 inches that lands on your roof is going to melt and go somewhere. We don't want it to go on the sidewalk. Right? And other elevated things like our the medians of our roads, our parking lot islands, they all accumulate snow and melt. So that's vertical drainage. Mm-hmm. Another one of our ideas is make it easy to plow. If you design an obstacle course on your sidewalk or on your parking lot, how do you expect it to be clear? Mm-hmm. It's not going to be clear. The plow driver is not jumping out in the middle of the night and grabbing their snow shovel. So you're going to have patches of snow all over the place unless you design it for the contours of this rigid piece of iron, mm-hmm. right? And so we can think about that. Yeah. Snow storage is a huge consideration, that we have adequate space and meltwater control, and there's a lot of other things that go into snow storage. Mm-hmm. For example, our architects, landscape architects, and most will see an empty spot on a plan sheet and think that's a great place to put a little forest or park benches or who knows what. But if we don't have an empty space, where are we putting the snow? Mm-hmm. We cannot put the snow on top of the pine tree and the park bench and so on.
Right.
So therefore, we have to understand how much space we need and what kind of things can be in that space. Like a little blue stem would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But a red pine would be not fine for winter.
Right. Is there I'm just curious, is there some sort of a formula you can apply? Can you look at the square footage of a parking lot and say, based on historical precipitation averages, you're going to need this much space? Is that
exactly? We are developing a snow storage calculator because you won't believe this. We could not find anywhere in the literature how much space we need for snow storage. Now, it's been snowing a long time in Minnesota and other states. And why couldn't we find this?
Yeah.
So we've created our own. We don't have a very big data set to verify it. So we're looking for people to help us measure their snow pile related to their plow shed, the area that's plowed that goes to that, and to true our model so that our designers of the future know, okay, we need 25%.
Yeah.
So if anybody needs a research project, we have one for you.
All right.
Yeah.
What else are we not currently thinking about?
Let's see. The snow storage, salt storage we have in there because salt is stored certainly at municipal buildings, but also on private parking lots. And that's seasonal, and we can design both the permanent and the seasonal salt storage so that it is less damaging in many ways. So we're asking our designers to ask our clients, will there be seasonal snow or salt storage here? And if so, we have some guidelines on how to make that, in the best possible way. We do have some other sections that are used less frequently if the easy things don't work, but pavement reduction and pavement alternatives. If it's an inch less pavement, an inch less salt needed. If we get into a problem where we have a cold front entrance, we're in the shade and we're in the low spot and we got the wind and we can't do anything about it, then it's time to break out the alternative pavements. Let's look at a heated pavement. Let's do something a little different.
Interesting.
So we kind of don't say that is our first stepping stone because that's more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But if we get that little wedge of surface that's going to be a failure for the project, we have some things we can do.
Right.
And then we kind of group all of our guidance together for our architects, our landscape architects, wherever we can use plants. So they kind of have one easy place to look at. Oh, these are how we use it in snow storage. These are how we use it for windbreaks. These are how we use it to adjust the sun, and things like that. So, we got a lot of just real easy but fun things they can think about.
Right. Do you look at the impact of snow storage and salt on landscape plants? I know that, salt obviously is really harmful to a lot of plants.
Mm-hmm.
Do you look at advising people to install different types of plants that are more salt tolerant? Is that kind of in your realm too?
Yeah, we do have that. We do have, we have linked our designers up to lists of plants that are more salt tolerant. But here's the thing to imagine. Imagine a parking lot island. Now, our landscape architects imagine it to be green and an ecosystem, and it has a tree and a shrub and all these flowers and grasses and beauty. And that's how it's designed and built. Then it gets snow on it, and we plow snow on it, and it melts. And where does the melted snow go? It goes all across the parking lot, makes it icy, so we salt it.
Mm-hmm.
In the Twin Cities, we get about 50 thaw-free cycles each winter. Not all of them are long enough to melt the snow and move it. Some happen before there's snow. But let's say half of them, 25 times, we get this parking lot island melting, sprawling, freezing, icing, salting. Push the snow back up there, the next snow. So these islands die. They get full of weeds. They chop down the trees, and then pretty soon they say, these are ugly, so we're going to fill them with wood chips or rocks, maybe a boulder for decoration. Mm-hmm. And if you drive around your neighborhood and you look at the islands, you can tell where they are in this evolution. Mm. So We can have more success if we control the meltwater sprawl. That drives those 25 extra salting events. So if we can control the sprawl, eventually we'll be able to have a variety of plants that live. For now, without controlling that sprawl and refreeze and that salting cycle, you got to plant the salt-tolerant plants. Right. So it's a really interesting, full circle problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, so we have some images to share.
Okay.
And I feel like, and for people who are just listening to the audio version, I'm going to do my best to describe these, and I'll drop a link in the description to the images if you want to look at them. We're going to show them on the video, but I have a feeling that Minnesotans, when they see these images, will have a visceral reaction. Because to me, when I look at these photos, it is, some of them are painful because I know, we all know these spots where it's just, there's so much ice and it's dangerous. And, if you walk in the winter or bike in the winter or drive in the winter, you know what I'm talking about. So we're going to see if we can do this. I'm going to see if I can do this without moving my mouth away from the microphone, but, talk us through these images. So I've got an iPad here.
Okay.
And
yes.
So we are looking at, outside of it's a subway, and there is what looks like snow and ice accumulating underneath, an awning. So you can talk about this image a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So this is what I call vertical drainage. So the snow rests on the awning during a snow event. The maintenance crew comes and clears off the sidewalk. Okay, it's all clear. And now 2 days later, the sun starts shining. We got this snow resting on the awning, and it starts to drip. It drips on this line on our sidewalk, turns to ice overnight. They're called in, they salt it. Mm-hmm. The next day, the sun shines again, and it continues to drip. I learned this from the crew at 50th in France. They say, Connie, we cannot win, we cannot keep it safe because of all these awnings. Mm-hmm. And so our building architects aren't thinking about that we have to control the dripping from decks, from awnings, from anything that collects snow where there's a saltable surface under it. Mm-hmm. It's very, well, you can just walk around this winter and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'm looking at this image, I definitely see there's salt on the ground. So you can see the remnants of salt on bare pavement. Mm-hmm. And then you've got this icy spot in the middle, and it's just like one of the most frustrating things. It's like there's way too much salt and there's still ice on here because of the design of the place.
Right.
Okay, let's look at the next one. Looks like we're looking at some snow storage here in a parking lot. And you can see it melting, and it looks wet right now. And boy, when that freezes, that is going to be not a fun place to visit. Can you talk about this one a little bit?
Yeah, so that's what I consider horizontal drainage. So the snow that is either pushed into a snow pile or just falls across the landscape, in the lawn, in the bushes, whatever, it's going to melt and it's going to run. As designers, we have to understand where the snow is going to be and intercept it before it runs across every parking lot, intersection, road that we own in. We've never worried about that before. Mm-hmm. It's an entirely different way to design your drainage.
And so what would be an example of how you could remediate something like this?
Well, the easiest way is put your snow storage on the downhill side of the surface, not on the uphill side. Now, that may not always be possible. So if you have to store your snow on the uphill side, you might be able to change your curb. So instead of your curb cascading that meltwater across the parking lot, it's a little bit inverted, and it kind of catches it in the curb and directs it in the curb line instead of cascading it. Mm-hmm. You could also take some pervious concrete pavers and put a line of that, right in front of your snow storage. So when it starts to move across your parking lot, it goes down those little holes, and we intercept it. We have a lot of different ways to intercept that sprawl.
Yeah, that's something we notice at MWMO. We have permeable pavers around our building here, and those are the least icy spots in the winter because the water does just all sort of drain before it can freeze and pool on the surface there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so next image. Oh yes, this is an image that causes me a lot of pain. So we're looking at, looks like it's maybe along a parkway, but there's a sidewalk that is completely covered in compacted snow and ice. What's the story with this one?
All right. So the city of Bloomington and myself, some of our Bolton Menk people, we were standing in this intersection because this is a problem area for them. And you can't see this, but the sidewalk leading up to this is completely free and clear of snow and ice, just regular pavement. We saw a jogger heading towards us. We knew they were going to run through the intersection, and then we said, are they going to run on that icy sidewalk? Are they going to turn around and just run back where they came, or are they going to run in the road?
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, they ran in the road, moving the oncoming car into the turn lane. So, of course, they didn't run over the runner. And then we said, well, whose problem is this? Why do we have an icy sidewalk? Is that the maintenance problem? Because they should have put some more salt on that.
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a design problem? Because they didn't get rid of those trees on that slope. They should have leveled that off, brought the sun onto the sidewalk.
Mm.
Or is that a planning project? Who would run a sidewalk network through a winter hazard zone? Or is that a jogger decision error? Like, I should have not jogged in the road. I should have just turned around. Or is that a city of Bloomington policy problem? Like, we want everybody to stay indoor in the winter and get a treadmill. Do not go out on our sidewalks. I mean, it isn't just one person or one industry's fault. Mm-hmm. It's all of us. If you're a designer, if you're a planner, if you're a maintenance, you all have something you can do or not do to improve winter performance. And we've traditionally, or at least for the last 20, 30 years, we've just been laying it all on the maintenance people. Like, this is your responsibility. And you know what? They taught me it really isn't all their responsibility.
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot to put on them. I mean, the conditions are challenging, as you point out. You know, some of the infrastructure is just built in a way that these problems just sort of accumulate.
Yeah.
Okay. This is so here we're looking at a walkway with a kind of a little ADA pedestrian on-ramp that has been completely eroded, I'm guessing, by salt.
Right, right.
And that's something you touched on earlier that I didn't mention, is that, you know, chloride salt is bad for the environment, bad for water quality. It's also really corrosive to infrastructure.
Right, right. And so really that's all this picture is we've updated our research on that. Our new estimates show for every ton of salt you apply, you'll get between $1,700 to $17,000 of infrastructure damage. And largely depends if you put it in the back alley, you know, or the front steps of the Capitol building, what that damage estimate would be. So in this case, I don't know if it was a maintenance problem, like they didn't understand how much salt, or if they have a drainage problem in winter. They have meltwater sprawl coming down this pedestrian ramp all the time. But this tells us we have a lot.
Too much salt.
We have a lot to investigate.
Yeah.
You know, one of the fun things I've been doing as we're doing some pilot cities with low salt design. And we've had the opportunity to have their public works director or their supervisor show us like 10 problem areas in their community. You know, whether it's a road or a parking lot, this is where we have a problem. And then we have the whole group out there, the engineers, the planners, the architects, trying to use our new low salt design thinking to say, well, how could we have designed this different? Could we retrofit it? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Mm-hmm. And it's been really fun to hear people's ideas. Yeah.
I bet. Okay. Last one. So you were talking about these islands in the parking lots. And here's an example. And it looks like we're looking at a dead tree, actually a whole bunch of dead trees in these islands. I think this is pretty much what you were just talking about a little bit ago, right?
Yeah, this is Eden Prairie. This was one of the stops we went with them when we were looking at their problem areas. And this is not what the architect designed, I don't believe, when they imagined what these parking islands could look like. But just that cycle of piling snow on them, having it sprawl, melt, we got to salt. Now it snows again. We push it on the island, and it kills everything. And all of our Minnesota parking lot islands are in this evolution from the beautiful green that the architect imagined to rock with a boulder and some tree stumps if they haven't, removed the tree stumps. So I just encourage the audience, go look at the 10 first parking lot islands that you see today or tomorrow and see what stage of the evolution they're in, and could we design so this doesn't happen? Yes, we could.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question, and it's a big question, and I don't know that there is an answer to it, but I'm curious in how you're going to respond. How do we solve this problem of chloride pollution? And maybe what does success look like? Can we get to zero salt someday, or is success just that we're doing everything we can and minimizing the amount of salt that's being used, and we reach a kind of equilibrium or something?
Well, that is a tough question. What I have been trying to do, 25 years ago, we started the Salt Symposium, which is a 2-day event where we talk about what is chloride and what does it do. And then we bring in everybody we can think of, the people that manufacture and sell salt, equipment like plow blades, water softeners, fertilizer, farmers, researchers, politicians, citizens, educators, to say, okay, we use so much salt. It's going to take all of us in our unique jobs to do something different, something smarter. It's not just the plow drivers can fix it. It's not just the farmers can fix it. It's not just me as a homeowner that it has a water softener can fix it. Every single one has to do something in their circle of influence. And I don't know, fast forward 100 years, where are we going to be?
Yeah.
We know that the water can't sustain it.
Right.
We absolutely know that. The projections are not very encouraging. But it takes so many people. I would just encourage everybody, especially people like you that do education, to reach out to the largest audience you can and let them know and give them something they can do about it.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Obviously, when it comes to residents and businesses, we have resources on our website where people can learn, how to reduce their salt use at home and in their communities. One thing I should have mentioned that I'll mention now is that you should definitely encourage business owners to hire contractors who have been certified by the MPCA in smart salting practices, and encourage, if you know business owners or property managers, encourage them to get smart salting certified. And you can find a list of people who are smart salting certified contractors on the MPCA's website. So that's something you can do. We have at the MWMO, we have a number of grant programs. We have our stewardship fund grants, and we also do larger capital project grants, and those are available for a variety of projects, including salt reduction projects. We gave a grant to the city of Fridley a few years ago to upgrade their snow plows with some salt brining equipment and upgrade their facility with a salt briner. And so we do things like that. There's also been smart salting legislation that has been slowly making its way through the legislature. Every year we think this is going to be the year, and then it hasn't quite made it to the finish line just yet, but that's something I think people should look into. What else should people do? Where can people go to learn more about low salt design?
Well, I would say that they would have to contact me or Bolton and Menk right now, because although we have been doing a good job of training our internal staff of 1,000 people, and we have manual and a library and all sorts of things, we are just not quite out there yet. We have 5 pilot cities that are helping us see how it works with them. So that's a shout out to Bloomington, Hopkins, Ridgefield, Eden Prairie, and Minnetonka. we are looking to add in more pilots. And at some point, Bolton and Menk will release this for, the greater good. Mm-hmm. But we're cautious. We want to make sure we have it right and that it is ready. But I would just say anything that you can do in low salt design to improve the pavement performance, probably the easiest is look at what's shadowing the most important areas and see if you can get some sunlight there in the winter.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy one for most people.
Well, that's great. That feels like a pretty good place to end, unless, do you have any final thoughts, or is there anything I didn't ask that you want to talk about?
No, I just I appreciate being here. I appreciate MWMO being such a good partner. And, especially in the early days when nobody was talking about salt, you guys jumped on board and said, hey, we want to talk about it. We want to help it. We want to do what we can. And I feel the same energy as we move into design that, hey, let's talk about it. Here we are on a podcast. Let's not have a closed mind. Let's have an open mind. Let's see how we get to that next level. And I think that's what it takes. More people like the MWMO to just say, let's think outside the box. We see a problem and we need some new solutions. So just so appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's great. We appreciate you being here and letting us learn more about this, and appreciate your leadership on this issue over the years. And with that, I think we'll close. So thank you for listening and watching. And visit our website to learn more about smart salting, and we'll see you in the next episode.